Omega found wolves guarding her mother's grave. The Alpha King was keeping his promise. The forest was silent, but it was not empty. Mist drifted between the twisted trunks of ancient trees, curling around roots like fingers reaching for something lost. Lyra moved carefully along the narrow path, her boots barely making a sound on the damp earth. Every step carried the weight of her memories, heavy as the fog that clung to her shoulders. She had not been here since the day her mother died. Not really. The grave had been tended, cleaned, but untouched by her presence. The thought of standing before it now made her stomach twist with nerves, yet she had to come. Questions, unspoken for years, tugged at her heart, demanding answers she feared she might not like. As she approached the clearing, a low hum filled the air, subtle but unmistakable. It was the sound of breath, deep and steady, though she could see no one around. Her pulse quickened. Then she saw them, wolves. A pack, massive and imposing, their fur a mixture of silver and midnight, surrounded the grave in a perfect circle. They did not move, but their eyes followed her every step. Each eye glinted with intelligence, as though they understood her every thought. Lyra froze, unsure whether to retreat or approach. The wolves did not growl, but she felt their warning. She felt it in her bones. Her mother's grave lay beyond them, untouched, sacred, and fiercely protected. Lyra had never believed in magic, but the forest now whispered differently. Something extraordinary, something alive, was keeping watch. Who are you?" she whispered, more to herself than to the creatures. The wind carried her words and the mist shivered. Then a figure stepped out from behind a tree. Lyra's heart lurched. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding. He moved with the grace of a predator, silent but certain. His hair was black as a raven's wing, eyes sharp and stormy, and his gaze held a strange mixture of authority and something softer, something almost sorrowful. "I should have expected you here," he said, his voice calm but edged with strength. "You always come to her grave." Lyra stiffened. "And you are?" she demanded, though a part of her already knew. "Kale," he replied, "Alpha King of the northern clans and guardian of your family's honor." The words hit her like cold water. Stories of the Alpha King had reached even her quiet village, tales of strength, fear, and loyalty. But she had never imagined he would appear here now in the mist, guarding her mother's grave with wolves that moved as if alive with his command. You knew my mother?" Lyra asked, uncertain. Kale's jaw tightened. "I promised her I would watch over you, always, and I have kept that promise." Lyra swallowed hard. "Why, I don't even know you." "Your mother was my friend, my ally. She asked me to protect you. And I will, whether you want it or not." The wolves shifted slightly, as though sensing her doubt. Lyra felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. She wanted to step forward, but the guardian stopped her. She noticed now that they were no ordinary wolves. Their eyes shone with an almost human understanding, and every hair on their backs bristled with energy she could feel in her chest. "I don't need protection," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Kale's eyes softened just a fraction. "Perhaps not yet. But danger has a way of finding those who least expect it." Lyra looked down at the grave. The soil was fresh, yet the air felt heavy, as if something beneath the earth had shifted. A chill ran down her spine. She remembered her mother's stories, tales of a family curse, whispered in secret, never fully explained. Her mother had said it was old, dangerous, tied to their bloodline, but she had always laughed when Lyra pressed for details. "You'll understand one day," she had said. Lyra now thought she understood. The wolves, the mist, Kale, everything felt tied together, threads of a story her mother had begun but could not finish. "Why are there wolves here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are they guarding her?" Kale stepped closer, hands relaxed but ready, his presence both reassuring and tense. "Because they are bound to the promise, to her, and now to you." Lyra's pulse quickened. "Bound? What do you mean?" "The forest listens," Kale said quietly. "The land, the pack, they obey those who understand the ancient ways. Your family, your mother," she understood. You will too, one day. A rustle in the mist made them both turn. Lyra's eyes widened as a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, dark and shapeless, like smoke made of sorrow. The wolves growled low, a sound that shook the ground. Even Kale's stance shifted, his calm authority now sharpened with alertness. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something has awakened, something that has waited a long time." Lyra's throat tightened. What is it?" Kale shook his head. "I don't know yet, but it is tied to your bloodline. And to the promise I made." The shadow stirred again, moving closer, feeding off the tension in the clearing. The mist thickened, swirling around the wolf's paws. Lyra felt a strange pull, like something deep inside her was being called. Fear and curiosity battled inside her chest. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Kale reached out, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay close. Do not show fear. It senses weakness." Lyra nodded, though her voice failed her. The wolves, sensing his command, positioned themselves between her and the shadow, bodies coiled like living armor. Their eyes glowed faintly, a soft silver that cut through the darkness. "You were brave," Kale murmured, his gaze on her face. "Like your mother." Lyra flinched at the compliment. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Not her father, not her friends, not even strangers. There was something dangerous in his words, something that made her chest ache with a longing she didn't understand. The shadow moved closer, forming shapes, faces, perhaps memories, perhaps illusions, but nothing solid. The wolves barked sharply, and Lyra felt her own pulse thundering in time with them. She realized that she had never felt anything like this before. Fear and wonder mingled together, twisting into something strange and powerful. Kale's voice cut through her thoughts. "This is only the beginning. The forest remembers. The curse remembers. And now it knows you are here." Lyra's heart skipped. I don't understand. What does it want?" Kale's eyes narrowed. "It is tied to your bloodline. It feeds on grief, on broken promises, on fear. But it can also be controlled. You will learn. We will learn together." Lyra stared at him, torn between distrust and something far deeper, something she could not name. He was dangerous, and yet she felt inexplicably safe near him. The shadow surged forward suddenly, a twisting column of darkness that seemed to reach for her. The wolves lunged, teeth bared, but their bodies did not pass through it. Instead, they circled tighter, growling in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Kale stepped in front of her, voice steady but commanding. "Back! You will not touch her while I stand." The shadow paused, almost as if it recognized him, then retreated into the mist. The wolf's fur bristled, then relaxed, and the clearing fell silent once more. Lyra's knees weakened. She sank to the ground, hands on the cold earth of her mother's grave. Tears she had not known she held welled up, slipping silently down her cheeks. Kale knelt beside her, careful to leave a respectful distance. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "There are forces you do not yet understand, forces that will test you and me." Lyra looked up, mist clinging to her hair, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why now?" Kale's gaze softened, and for a moment the king of the northern clans was no longer a figure of authority, but a man bound by promise, by duty, by something deeper he would not name. "Because you are her daughter, and because some promises are stronger than death itself." Lyra felt a shiver run through her body, a mix of fear, awe, and something else she could not define. She knew this was only the beginning, that the forest, the wolves, the curse, and Kale, they were all threads of a story she had only just begun to understand. She took a deep breath and stood, her hands brushing the soil of her mother's grave. The mist seemed to pulse around her, almost alive. She knew that whatever lay ahead, her life would never be the same. Kale nodded once, silently acknowledging her courage. The wolves circled closer, their eyes gleaming in the mist. And then, as if sensing something unseen, all of them, the wolves, Kale, and Lyra, turned toward the forest edge. A shadow moved again, larger this time, closer, watching, waiting. and the air hummed with power, ancient and hungry, as though the world itself had begun to remember. Lyra swallowed. Her heart raced. She did not know what awaited her in the coming days, but one thing was certain. Her mother's death had been only the beginning. And the promise of the Alpha King was not yet fulfilled. The mist had not lifted by morning. Lyra awoke beneath the shelter of an ancient oak, the wolves lying near her, their breathing steady but alert. Cale had kept his distance, leaning against the trunk of a tree as if he had always belonged to the forest itself. The first rays of sunlight barely touched the ground, casting long shadows that danced across the moss and fallen leaves. Lyra rubbed her eyes, trying to push away the lingering fear from the night before. The shadow at the forest's edge still haunted her mind. She had felt it watching, waiting. And now, with Cale beside her, she understood that leaving the forest alone was impossible. "Why are we here?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but firm. "Why are you taking me deeper into the forest?" Cale's gaze did not waver from the path ahead. "Because it is not safe for you to stay near your mother's grave. The forest remembers, Lyra. And the shadow that came last night, it will return, stronger." Lyra felt her stomach twist. "Safe? You mean you want to control me?" Cale's jaw tightened. "No, I want to protect you. You will learn soon that there is a difference. One is for your freedom, the other for your destruction." Lyra hesitated, anger flaring in her chest. "I don't need protection. I can handle myself." Cale turned, his eyes stormy but unreadable. "Perhaps, but sometimes strength alone is not enough. There are forces in this forest older than any clan, older than any king, and they do not care for strength alone. You are tied to them whether you understand it or not." The wolves padded softly along the path, their fur glinting faintly in the morning light. Lyra noticed how they moved as if in silent conversation with Cale, their loyalty absolute. She had never seen anything like it. The journey continued through twisted groves and over frozen streams, and each step seemed to pull her closer to something she could not yet name. Lyra felt an unfamiliar tension between them, a mix of fear, fascination, and something deeper, something almost electric. She wanted to push it away, to focus on the danger, on the forest, on the shadow, but she could not. At midday, they paused near a small clearing where the air felt warmer, lighter. Birds flitted between branches, and the wolves lay down, their eyes watchful. Lyra sat on a moss-covered stone, breathing in the scent of earth and leaves. "You tire easily," Cale said, crouching nearby. His gaze lingered on her with a mixture of concern and calculation. "The forest tests you, yes, but more than that, it tests your spirit." Lyra bristled. "I am not weak. Do you think I am?" "I do not think," Cale replied simply. "I know, and right now you are stronger than you know, stronger than the shadow expects. But strength is not just what you wield with your hands, it is what you guard in your heart." Her pulse quickened. Something in his words, in his gaze, made her chest ache. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but no words came. She felt exposed in a way she had never felt before, and the truth she did not want to admit stirred within her. She was afraid of this closeness, this feeling that both unsettled and drew her in. Cale stood and moved toward the path again. "We should keep moving. The shadow will not wait for us to rest." Lyra rose reluctantly, her eyes drawn to the pack that followed silently. She realized that the wolves were not just guardians. They were guides, leading her toward something she was destined to face. The afternoon passed with careful steps, winding paths, and occasional glimpses of the shadow that haunted her. It never attacked directly, only watching from the edges as if testing, learning. And each time, Lyra felt the pull of her own power, faint and unfamiliar, tugging from deep within her chest. "Cale," she began, voice hesitant. "Why did you promise my mother you would protect me?" He paused, hands resting on the hilt of the sword at his waist. "Because she saved my life once, long ago. And because she believed that one day you would face something that even I could not fight alone. She trusted you and I promised her." Lyra swallowed hard. "And now you expect me to trust you." Kale's eyes softened slightly. Not yet, you will, in time. The tension between them was unspoken but undeniable. Lyra felt it with every glance, every brush of his hand when he moved close to help her over a fallen log, every moment when his presence filled the space beside her. She wanted to deny it, wanted to focus on the danger, but the truth lingered like fire beneath her ribs. She was drawn to him, whether she admitted it or not. As evening approached, the forest grew colder, the mist thickening again. The wolves growled softly, a low, warning sound. Lyra looked ahead and saw it, the shadow, taller now, darker, more defined. It moved closer, its shape flickering like smoke in the wind. Kale drew his sword, the metal glinting even in the dim light. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "It senses fear. Do not give it what it wants." Lyra's knees trembled, but she obeyed. She stayed close, her hand brushing against Kale's arm. His presence was steady, grounding, and she realized that for the first time since her mother's death, she felt safe. The shadow surged forward suddenly, a twisting column of dark energy that reached for them both. The wolves lunged, forming a protective ring around Lyra and Kale. Their growls echoed through the forest like thunder, forcing the shadow to pause, recoil. Kale stepped forward, sword raised, eyes blazing with determination. "Begone! You will not touch her." The shadow hesitated, then withdrew into the mist, leaving only a whisper behind, a cold, lingering echo that seemed to speak directly to Lyra's heart. Breathing heavily, Lyra turned to Kale. "Why does it want me?" He sheathed his sword slowly, his gaze never leaving the trees. "Because you are tied to it, and because it knows you are capable of more than you imagine, but not yet, not until you learn to face it." Lyra nodded, though the weight of his words pressed on her. She had always thought her life was ordinary, quiet, unremarkable. But now, with the forest alive around her, the wolves guarding her, and Kale watching her with an intensity she could barely understand, she realized how wrong she had been. They continued through the night, moving carefully under the pale light of the moon. The mist thickened, and the forest seemed alive with whispers, shadows flitting through the trees, strange shapes forming in the corner of her vision. Lyra held her breath each time, sensing the danger but also sensing something deeper, a connection to the land, to the wolves, to Kale, and to something inside herself she had not yet discovered. At a small clearing, Kale finally stopped. "Rest here," he said, motioning to a circle of moss-covered stones. "The shadow will not find us here, not tonight." Lyra sank onto a stone, exhausted but restless. She glanced at Kale, who stood watch, his figure strong and alert. She wanted to speak, to ask him everything, about the wolves, the shadow, her mother, and the promise that bound him to her. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she watched him, noting the tension in his stance, the quiet power in his eyes, and the faint warmth in his expression when he looked at her. She did not understand it, and she did not want to, not yet. The wolves curled around them, forming a living barrier of silver and black. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight, and Lyra realized they were more than protectors. They were family, guardians of a bond she was only beginning to understand. Hours passed in silence. The forest whispered secrets she could not comprehend, and then just before sleep claimed her, she heard it. A soft voice carried on the wind, almost like her mother's, whispering a single word. "Trust." Lyra shivered. She did not fully understand what it meant, but the word settled into her chest, a spark of courage she had never known. She glanced at Kale, who was still watching the tree line, and for a moment their eyes met. In that gaze she saw not just duty but something else, a promise unspoken but powerful tying them together. The shadow had not gone. It waited, patient and watchful, somewhere in the darkness beyond the mist. But Lyra knew she was not alone. She had the wolves, Kale, and a strength inside herself that was beginning to awaken. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion take her, and when she woke, the world would feel different. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with shadows and tests, But for the first time she felt the stirrings of something more: hope, courage, and a connection she could not deny. The forest was alive. The wolves were watching. And the Alpha King was keeping his promise. The night had grown colder, and the forest seemed alive with whispers. Every branch creaked under the weight of unseen eyes, and the mist swirled as if it carried 1,000 secrets. Lyra's heart thumped in her chest, each beat echoing the tension between her and Kale. They had moved deeper into the forest, guided by the wolves, toward the ruins of an old temple whispered to be older than the clans themselves. "This place," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels wrong." Kale's eyes never left the shadows ahead. "It is not wrong," he said quietly. "It is alive, and it remembers everything, every sorrow, every promise, every shadow of fear." Lyra shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. She had faced shadows before, those that haunted her dreams, but this was different. Here, the air felt thick, almost solid, pressing against her lungs, filling her chest with a cold weight. And somewhere deep in the mist she could sense it, the shadow that had haunted her since the grave, now stronger, closer, feeding on the fear she could not hide. The wolves moved ahead silently, their fur glinting in the faint moonlight, their eyes glowing faintly. Lyra noticed how they communicated with Kale, a silent understanding, an unspoken warning. They were not just guardians anymore. They were guides, leading them toward something dangerous, something that even Kale could not yet fully see. Kale stopped suddenly, motioning for her to stay behind him. Before them, the ruins of the temple rose like a black scar against the pale sky. Its stone pillars were cracked, twisted, and covered in moss, but the aura that surrounded it was undeniable. Power, old and hungry, lingered in every shadowed corner. "It's here," Kale said softly, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. "The shadow, it feeds from this place. It knows you are here now, Lyra, and it wants more than your fear. It wants control." Lyra's stomach turned. "Control? What does it mean?" Kale's eyes softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. "It wants to bend you to its will. To twist what you feel, what you are, into something it can use. Your blood, your power, it calls to it. That is why you are here. That is why I am here." Lyra swallowed hard. Her chest tightened as she felt the pull within herself, something deep and hidden, stirring like a faint flame in the dark. She had always felt different, alone, and yet now she realized the truth. The shadow was not random. It had always been waiting for her, for the strength she did not yet understand. The wolves padded forward, circling the temple cautiously. One of them, a large silver wolf with eyes like polished steel, stopped and growled low, its body stiff. The shadow stirred in the temple's broken archway, coalescing into a darker, more defined form. It was taller, stronger than before, its presence more suffocating, more hungry. Kale stepped in front of her, raising his sword, the blade catching the faint light. "Stay behind me. Focus on your breathing. Fear is what it feeds on, not strength." Lyra nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She had never felt so exposed, yet so alive. The strange pull between them, the tension that had been simmering since the grave, was now sharper, more urgent. Every glance, every movement, every unspoken word between them carried weight. She felt it in her chest, twisting with fear and something else, something she could not yet name. The shadow surged forward suddenly, a twisting column of darkness that moved faster than anything she had seen. The wolves lunged, teeth bared, forming a protective circle around Lyra and Kale. The sound of growls and the snap of claws against stone echoed through the ruins like thunder. Kale's voice rang out, commanding and fierce. "Begone! You will not take her!" The shadow recoiled slightly, but it did not retreat. It circled them, moving like smoke, whispering voices that clawed at Lyra's mind. She felt memories she had never lived, grief she had never known, pain she could not name. The shadow's power was not just physical, it touched her spirit, her heart, her soul. Kale noticed her faltering, stepping closer, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through her. She felt steadied, grounded, but also something else, something tender, something dangerous in its intensity. "You are stronger than it thinks," he murmured. "Trust yourself, trust me." Lyra took a deep breath, closing her eyes. She reached inside herself, searching for the spark she had felt at her mother's grave, the power that had always been just beyond her understanding. She felt it stir, faint but unmistakable, like a pulse in the air around her. When she opened her eyes, the shadow hesitated. It sensed the change, the rising strength. Lyra's hands glowed faintly with a silver light, the same hue as the wolf's eyes. She had never controlled it before, but instinctively she extended her arms and the light flared outward, pushing the shadow back. Kale's eyes widened slightly in surprise and pride. "You see, you are capable, and you are not alone." The shadow hissed, swirling faster, attempting to envelop her again. But the wolves lunged, teeth and claws striking with precision, forcing it back. Lyra felt the pull again, but this time she did not retreat. She focused on the strength in her chest, on the fire growing within her, on Kale standing beside her. Together, they forced the shadow back to the temple's broken archway. Kale swung his sword, the steel slicing through the darkness, while Lyra's silver light coiled around the ruins like a living shield. The shadow screeched, a sound that made the very air vibrate, then recoiled into the shadows, leaving only a whisper. "You cannot hold me forever." Breathing heavily, Lyra sank to the ground, the weight of the battle pressing on her shoulders. Kale knelt beside her, his hand steadying her shoulder. "You did well," he said softly, "better than I expected." Lyra shook her head, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't know I could do that." "You always could," Kale replied. "You just didn't believe it." "Fear is a powerful teacher, Lyra, but so is courage. And tonight you learned both." They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the forest breathe around them. The wolves circled protectively, eyes glinting in the moonlight, but for the first time, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. The shadow was not gone, but she was no longer powerless. Kale's gaze lingered on her, stormy and intense, and Lyra felt her own heartbeat quicken. She wanted to deny the pull she felt toward him, but it was impossible. Every glance, every shared breath, every brush of his hand ignited something deep within her, a connection she could not ignore, no matter how much she tried. "You," she began, voice trembling slightly. "Why do you stay? Why do you protect me, even now?" Kale's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the Alpha King was not a figure of authority, not a warrior, but a man bound by promise and something deeper, something he had not yet spoken. "Because I promised your mother," he said quietly, "and because I cannot turn away from you, not now, not ever." Lyra's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him what she felt, but the words stuck in her throat. She only nodded, understanding more than she could admit. Their bond was growing stronger, forged in the fires of fear and courage, in the quiet moments between battles and whispered words. The forest seemed to settle around them, as if recognizing their strength, their connection. Yet the shadow had not gone. Somewhere in the ruins, in the corners of the temple, it waited, patient, watching, knowing that the battle tonight was only the beginning. Kale rose slowly, extending a hand to Lyra. "We should move," he said. "The night is not safe and the shadow will return. We must be ready." Lyra took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength that flowed from him. She rose beside him, her own power thrumming beneath her skin, a quiet promise that she would not be afraid again. The wolves led them through the ruins, their eyes bright, their steps silent but precise. The forest was dark, alive with whispers, but Lyra felt something new, determination. She would not run, she would not hide. And she would face whatever came next, shadow, fear, or destiny itself, with Kale by her side. As they reached the edge of the temple clearing, a cold wind swept through the forest, carrying a voice, a whisper, almost human, almost familiar. Lyra froze. Kale's hand tightened on hers. "The shadow knows you are ready," he said, and it will test you harder than you have ever imagined." Lyra swallowed. Fear still lingered, but now it was tempered with resolve. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The first rays of dawn barely touched the horizon when Lyra opened her eyes. The forest was quiet now, though the air still carried the weight of the night's terror. Her body ached, muscles tight from battle, but it was not just physical pain. Her chest felt heavy with fear, relief, and the strange, undeniable pull toward Kale. He was kneeling nearby, sword sheathed, eyes scanning the forest as if the shadow could return at any moment. The wolves circled protectively around them, alert but calm for the first time in days. Their presence, once intimidating, now felt comforting, like silent guardians tethered to her very soul. "You're awake," Kale said quietly, rising to his full height. His dark eyes softened when they met hers, stormy skies giving way to warmth and relief. Lyra nodded slowly. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked, though part of her still feared the answer. Kale shook his head. "Not entirely. The shadow is weakened, yes. But it will not vanish completely. Darkness never truly dies, only transforms." She swallowed hard, feeling the truth in his words. The shadow had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and yet it had also revealed something powerful, something within herself she had never known. She had faced fear and survived. She had found strength, courage, and something else, something growing between her and Kale that frightened and thrilled her at the same time. Kale stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You did well," he said, his voice low, carrying both pride and something more intimate, something he did not name. "Better than I ever imagined. You are stronger than the forest, stronger than the shadows, and stronger than your own fears." Lyra looked down, uncertain how to respond. Pride mingled with the fluttering ache in her chest. I could not have done it without you," she admitted. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet in the quiet forest it carried all the weight of truth. Kale's gaze softened, and for a moment the Alpha King was just a man who had kept a promise, who had stood by her through fear and danger, and who had never once faltered in his loyalty. "And I will never leave you," he said quietly. "Not now, not ever." Lyra's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him what she felt, but the words seemed too fragile, too small for what stirred in her heart. Instead, she let her hand brush against his, a silent acknowledgement of trust, connection, and something far deeper than either had admitted. The wolves shifted around them, moving closer in a protective circle. One, the silver wolf whose eyes had always seemed sharp with intelligence, stepped forward and nuzzled Lyra gently. She laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension that had gripped her for so long. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace. Yet the shadow was not gone. In the corners of the ruins, in the folds of the mist, it lingered, less threatening now, weaker but still alive. Lyra understood that it was tied to her bloodline, and to the power she had begun to embrace. But she no longer feared it, not entirely. The fear that remained was tempered by strength, courage, and a newfound understanding of herself. Kale gestured toward the temple ruins. "We should leave," he said. "There is more to your power than this place. You need to learn to grow, to understand how to control it before the shadow can return fully." Lyra nodded, determination rising within her. She had felt it tonight, the spark of something greater. A strength not just in her arms or her mind, but in her heart, in the bond she shared with Kale, in the loyalty of the wolves, and in the promise her mother had left behind. As they prepared to leave, a sudden movement caught her eye. From the edge of the clearing, a faint shimmer of silver light flickered. The shadow. No, something different, something familiar. "Kale," she whispered, pointing. He followed her gaze, eyes narrowing. "Stay behind me," he instructed, but his hand did not leave hers. From the mist emerged a figure, smaller than the shadow, but radiant in a way that made Lyra's chest ache. It was not fully human, nor entirely wolf, but a spirit of the forest, an echo of her mother's presence. The figure paused, regarding them with quiet intensity. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Her mother's voice, soft and warm, drifted on the wind. "You are ready, Lyra. Trust in your strength, trust in love. And remember, even in darkness, you are never alone." Tears filled Lyra's eyes. She had waited for this moment her whole life, the guidance she had needed, the reassurance she had never thought she would receive. She nodded, letting the feeling of connection settle into her chest. Kale's hand tightened around hers, grounding her. "It is done," he said quietly. "The shadow is weakened. You have faced it and you have prevailed, but the path ahead, it is yours to walk." Lyra drew a deep breath, feeling the silver light pulse faintly within her. "Then I will not hide," she said. "I will not run. And I will not let it control me." Kale's lips curved into a faint, rare smile. "Then we face it together." For the first time, the forest seemed to breathe with them. The mist lifted slightly, revealing the ruins more clearly, and the wolves stood tall, loyal, and unyielding. The bond between them, Lyra, Kale, and the pack, was no longer fragile or tentative. It was strong, unbroken, forged in danger, fear, and trust. Hours passed as they made their way back through the forest, moving carefully but with purpose. The danger of the shadow lingered at the edges of their awareness, but it was no longer a threat that dominated their every step. Lyra felt herself growing stronger, her senses sharper, her courage steadier. And through it all, Kale remained beside her, a constant presence, a promise kept, a bond undeniable. As they reached the clearing near her mother's grave, Lyra paused. The earth was calm now, the wolves settled in quiet vigilance. The grave lay before her, untouched and sacred, and she knelt, placing her hand gently on the soil. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of gratitude, sorrow, and love. She felt the faint pulse of her mother's presence, a warmth that settled into her heart. Kale knelt beside her, his dark eyes reflecting the early morning light. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Your mother entrusted you to me, but it was your courage that carried us both through the night." Lyra looked at him, the tension between them finally softening, the unspoken bond no longer needing to be hidden. "Kale, he leaned closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence, the steady strength that had carried them both. "SHH," he said softly. "You do not need words. We have faced the darkness and we are still here. That is enough." The wolves nuzzled against their legs, a quiet reminder of loyalty, of protection, of the bond that had grown between them. Lyra smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the night lift from her shoulders. For the first time she felt safe, not just from the shadow, but from the fear that had always held her back. They rose together, Lyra and Kale, the bond between them now undeniable. She felt the stirrings of a new understanding, not just of her power but of herself, of the connection that had grown in the space between fear and trust, danger and courage, silence and whispered words. "Where do we go now?" she asked, voice steady. Kale's eyes softened, and for the first time he allowed himself a small, rare smile. "Wherever you choose. The forest is vast, the world is vast, and your power, your life, it is yours to decide." Lyra nodded, a sense of calm settling into her chest. "Then we walk together," she said. "Through shadow, through light, through whatever comes next." Kale's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, a promise renewed without words. The wolves padded softly behind them, guardians, guides, and companions. As they left the grave behind, the forest seemed to shimmer, the light of dawn breaking through the mist, painting the trees with gold and silver. The shadow had been beaten, weakened, but not destroyed, yet they did not fear it. They had discovered something stronger, courage, trust, and the bond between them that no darkness could sever. Lyra glanced at Kale, a soft smile on her lips. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Kale's gaze met hers, unwavering and steady. "Always," he said. And in that single word, Lyra felt the weight of every vow, every danger, every shadow they had faced, culminating in something enduring, something unbreakable. The wolves howled softly, a song that carried across the forest, echoing through the trees like a blessing. Lyra and Kale walked side by side, not as protector and ward, not as alpha and omega, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and a love forged in darkness. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive and watchful, as if acknowledging their triumph. And though shadows would always linger at the edges, they would face them together. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the silver light within her pulse steady and strong. Kale's hand squeezed hers gently, a promise and a pledge, and for the first time she felt truly ready for whatever the world would bring. The sun broke fully over the horizon, golden and pure. The shadows retreated, the mist lifted, and the forest was alive with the sound of wind through leaves, the distant call of birds, and the quiet, unspoken promise of the future. Together, Lyra and Kale stepped forward, leaving behind the ruins, the shadows, and the grief of the past. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one, bound not just by fate, but by courage, trust, and the enduring light of love.